All the familiar faces. My name is Joey Norris. I'm chair of the Montgomery County Democrats. And we are here to meet a former El Paso City Council member. I'm sure that's why you're all here. Yeah. A City Council member that champions same-sex marriage protections. And there's El Paso City employees. We're also here to meet a former U.S. representative, a representative who championed expanding the VA, access to mental health care, our public lands and waters. We're also here to meet a former candidate for Senate who had the courage to take on Ted Cruz. A candidate who took no PAC money and took a state that was dead last in voter turnout to a 500% increase in young voters. And finally, we're here to meet the presidential candidate, Beto O'Rourke.
Thank you for having us out here today. Very, very grateful to you all. Really appreciate everyone making the most of this moment to come together. This is a defining moment of truth for the United States of America. And I know that is what has brought us out. In addition to this being the most beautiful day that I've ever lived on this planet. Just coming into Red Oak, just this profusion of color, everything in bloom, all these beautiful trees, extraordinarily beautiful homes that we were passing on our way in. Feel very, very lucky to be here. And we had a really great start to the day. We were in Shenandoah, and I was staying at a hotel on Sheridan Street and was thinking about the heritage of this part of Iowa. That town founded in 1870, so just a few years after the end of the Civil War. Its main thoroughfare named after a general who helped to bring that war to a close. I went on a morning run down Grant Avenue. So all this history coming in, and I was sharing this with Representative Chris Hall, who's been with us in the van the last couple of days. And he said, well, Red Oak has a really extraordinary part of this story to tell as well. And he was telling me about the men from Company M during the Civil War. Of 250, I believe 160 lost their lives in service and sacrifice to this country, which is a big part of our story as a nation and originates right here where we are, where we're standing, where you all live today. And of course, it didn't stop there. He was telling me about the Battle of Kasserine Pass in World War II. 45 men from this community killed or captured, many more wounded. That next night, more than 100 telegrams flooded into this community. And I can only imagine the wave of shock and devastation and despair that people must have felt, but also a testament to sacrifice and service from this part of our country. We stopped for a moment before we got a chance to see you at one of the public parks, actually the main park, not just more than a block away from that extraordinary county courthouse. And there were memorials to those who served in Korea, memorials to those who served in Vietnam, memorials to those who served in World War I. So really a community that has distinguished itself by service to this country. And as Joey was introducing me and talking about expanding mental health care at the VA for veterans, I'll tell you, in my hometown of El Paso, Texas, where we've also been known by the service and sacrifice of men and women who've served in our wars going back to World War I, up through the wars that we are fighting tonight. Their inspiration compelled me to make sure that I could do everything within my power, though I was in the minority party for every day of the 6 years in which I served, to make sure that we delivered for those who put their lives on the line for this country. We know right now that 20 veterans a day lose their lives by their own hand, the vast majority of them unable or unwilling, perhaps because of the long wait times to get into the VA, to see a psychiatrist or psychologist or a therapist or a social worker who literally could make the life or death difference for them. So when we had the opportunity to expand that care, we found a colleague, a Republican, that we may not agree on everything. We found enough common ground to pursue the common cause, to help those whom we serve in common. And we got that legislation signed into law by a man with whom I agree on almost nothing, Donald Trump. And yet, We were not going to allow our politics or partisanship, or whatever differences we have on the other important issues, to stand between us and delivering for those who've always delivered for us. I think that's our opportunity at this moment. Whether we're going to meet the challenge of healthcare in a country where tens of millions cannot see a doctor, cannot afford prescription medications, cannot go to a therapist. In some states like mine, the largest provider of mental health care services today is the county jail system, to the point that those sometimes with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and clinical depression are getting arrested on purpose to go to the one place they are guaranteed care. It's unconscionable, it's immoral, it's incredibly expensive to deliver that care in that way. I know that if we come together, not as Democrats, but as Americans around universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care for all, not only will more of us be able to live to our full potential, not only will it cost us a lot less than what we are paying today, but we will see this country hitting on all cylinders. Our promise fulfilled by those well enough to be able to do that. In an economy that works really well for very few people in this country. The greatest disparity in wealth and income in the lifetimes of anybody here, unless you're 150 years old and we're around in the last gilded age that provoked the last true progressive response. Today in America, folks are working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Cannot take time off to take care of their families or their kids or their parents, discriminated against in the workplace. Though Iowa took the lead in marriage equality, today in some states like mine, you can be fired based on your sexual orientation. In this country, women are paid 80 cents for every dollar that men make. African American women, 61 cents for every dollar a white man makes. And Latinas, 53 cents for every dollar a white man makes. That's a real challenge, but it should bring us together again, not as Democrats, not from folks from some parts of the country, but all of us as Americans, ensuring that every woman is treated equal to every man in this country. We could ratify the Equal Rights Amendment if we so chose, and I want to make sure that we do. You would expect, in my hometown of El Paso, Texas, which forms with Ciudad Juarez the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere, 3 million from these two countries speaking 2 languages come together, joined, not separated by the Rio Grande River, to form one people. El Paso, Texas, one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America. Not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants, but because we are a city of immigrants. You could expect that issue to dominate the conversation where I'm from, and it does. But to my surprise, and perhaps obvious to you, it has dominated the conversation here in Iowa. Go into a town like Storm Lake, defined by the immigrant experience, those who are following the jobs that for whatever reason no one born in Storm Lake is willing to do. The meat packing plant that ensures that we are fed and fed affordably, worked by immigrants coming to this country who want to make sure that they contribute to our shared success, who remind us that there are more than 1 million of our fellow Americans, young women and men brought here at a very young age, contributing so much to the greatness of this country, who live under a constant fear of deportation, back to a country they do not know, whose language they do not speak, where they no longer have family, where if they are successful against those long odds, they'll be successful for that place, for those people, not for us here in Iowa or in the United States of America. We could meet that challenge by ensuring that we free them from that fear of deportation, by making them U.S. citizens in this, their true, chosen home country. And I want to make sure that we're up to that challenge. And lastly, before I turn this over to you and listen to what's on your mind and answer your questions or get the benefit of your ideas and guidance, the largest challenge that we face, that the human race has ever faced, the fact that this planet is cooking right now, has warmed 1 degree Celsius just since 1980 over pre-industrial revolution levels, that it is in large part to blame for the floods that we've seen in southwestern Iowa, the largest runoff into the Missouri River Basin since we've been keeping records on the Missouri River Basin, produced the floods that busted the levees, drowned the towns that we just visited in Pacific Junction, the farms around them, was not caused by God or Mother Nature. It was caused by our own emissions, our own excesses, our own inaction in the face of the facts and the truth and the science. And I hate to break it to anybody who hasn't already come to this conclusion, it is going to get exponentially worse for our kids and our grandkids. Unless we change course now, we will visit a hell upon them that we can only imagine. The competition for resources, the viability of communities, not just like Pacific Junction, but my hometown in the desert Southwest, will be called into question. We have a chance to prevent the worst of those wildfires and droughts and floods and hurricanes and storms, but we have a very limited amount of time to act. 10 years is left to us now, the scientists say, to change course, to free ourselves from an overdependence on fossil fuels. And Iowa, more than 40 years ago, showed us the way, at least in part, to get out of that. To invest in renewable energy, and you're doing that as well. One of the leaders in this country on wind. If we can match that in my part of the country with solar, and if we can ensure that we are allowing farmers who just want to make a profit, that's all they ask, on growing the food that sustains this country and so much of the rest of the world, to also plant cover crops, to pull more carbon out of the air so that there's less of it out there cooking this planet, to use the newest technologies in precision tilling to disturb less of that carbon in the soil. If all of us does everything we can within our power and then uses our position on the world stage as the indispensable nation to convene the other powers of the planet to do their part as well, maybe, just maybe, we will be able to head off the worst of disasters for the generations that follow us. But we cannot meet this challenge or any of the challenges before us by half measures, around the margins. It's got to be everything we've got from every single one of us. It cannot be Democrats versus Republicans. We need them all. And I know that it's possible because this campaign that Joey talked about that we just ran in Texas, going to every single one of the 254 counties, we won more votes than any other Democrat in the history of the state of Texas. Won independents for the first time in a decade. Young voters turnout up 500% from the last midterm election. And here's the kicker. My mother, a lifelong Republican, voted for me in that election. So I know that we can do it. I know we can bring everybody in. Thank you all for having us out here today. Thank you for allowing me to introduce myself and to share with you why I want to serve you as your president. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to hearing what's on your mind. Cynthia Cano has got a microphone. If you get her attention, she'll bring it to you, and we can begin the conversation.
Okay, I see somebody right over here. Is my first question. Hi, welcome to Red Oak. I'm going to go to the meat of this, and I'm going to talk about impeachment. I know it's a bad thing to say, but I don't care. When I was 21 and a junior in college, and I was in a political science class, then I started learning about what really politics was all about. And the next year is when they did Watergate hearings, and I discovered then how important political involvement was and how really corrupt Richard Nixon was. Okay, otherwise I wouldn't have found out, I don't think. And I think it's important for us to proceed, and I just wanted to know your opinion on this.
Yeah, I love the way that you asked the question and the historical context and analogy that should inform how we look at what is happening in this country in 2019. Because if you go back to the early 1970s, you could say we had a lot going on. We were at war half a world away in Vietnam. Young men drafted into service were losing their lives in a war that we had a hard time defining victory for, that other young people were protesting in the streets of our country to stop. These men were coming back as veterans to a country that did not understand or appreciate and was not grateful for their service. We should be focusing on them. We should be focusing on the economy. We should be focusing on the fact that we were still in the midst of a Cold War, the consequence of which could annihilate the human race. So there was a lot on our plate. Why in the world would we get caught up in impeachment proceedings? But the genius of this country is that we are founded not on race or ethnicity, but this idea that we're all created equal and should have equal opportunity to reveal our genius to one another and the great things that we do, and to have equal opportunity in choosing those who will represent our interests, including in the highest positions of power and public trust. And if that extraordinary mechanism of democracy is debased or corrupted or lost, then we lose something unique, not just to us, but to world history. And as Lincoln reminded us, we're the last best hope of Earth, right? The United States of America, especially now at this moment. So the integrity and the sanctity of our democracy is paramount to meeting every challenge that I just described, including climate change. And if we can no longer trust it because we've decided that some men are above the law, because it's too politically inconvenient to pursue the facts and the truth, the consequences, the accountability, and the justice, we will have lost it for the generations that follow us. I'm convinced, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that as a candidate, Donald Trump invited the participation of a foreign power into this democracy that we hold sacred, that men and women fought for in Kasserine Pass, in the Civil War, maybe most importantly from Red Oak, where we stand. And their sacrifice means something to us, and we are the inheritors of it. We've got to see it through. And so inviting a foreign power to undermine our democracy, seeking to cover it up and obstruct justice, if there is no consequence for that, it will have set a precedent that could lead to the unraveling of this country and our democracy. So I'm with you. Impeachment is a hard thing to talk about. It's uncomfortable, and yet this is a test for us to decide what we stand for. And so I support those members of the House of Representatives who believe it is time to move forward with those proceedings, to follow the facts as far as they go, as high up as they lead, to present to the Senate all of the information so that they can make a wise judgment in the interest not of their next election or their political party, but the future of this country. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
Go back here by the pavilion. Over here to your right a little bit.
Hi, Beto. I'm Maggie McClown, and first I'm just to throw in a personal note. Eric Johnson and Dr. Parker in Dallas are very good friends of mine. I actually worked for Black Tie Dinner for 5 years as their development director, and it's a wonderful community. And I'd love to see equality for everyone and anti-harassment. But my question's different, because I moved to Iowa. I'm a native Iowan. I own farmland, and I'm very committed to conservation. I'm glad you talked about cover crops. What's your plan for getting us off this unsustainable corn soybean rotation, which has worked very well for farmers, but we're coming into a new farm crisis similar to the 80s when many farmers lost their land. But we have so many large farmers, it's easy to put in corn one year, soybeans the next, rotate, but it's empty calories. It's not good food. It can't sustain the population of the world. And how can we create a better agricultural system that maintains our great soil, supports the earth, minimizes runoff and hypoxia in the Gulf, which is hurting the fishing industry, everything from Montana and Minnesota down through the Mississippi watershed is horrible. Cover crops, I think, is one of the best options, but many farmers say they can't afford it because of the trade issues. So what's your plan in agriculture? Because right now we've got an empty calorie, unprofitable agricultural system.
Thank you for the question. And like you, I love Eric Johnson and Dr. Mark Parker. And so they're with us in spirit, even though they're actually in Dallas, Texas, right? And that's right, and Eric's from Iowa. Yeah. So in addition to providing that incentive to plant cover crop, I think just listening to farmers in the first place is how we answer every single question that you just raised. I'm a former small business owner with good friends, started a small technology company in El Paso, Texas in the 1990s. And if I were unable to make a profit, I couldn't pay my employees, we couldn't invest in the build out of our systems to be able to deliver for our clients, we'd be out of business. And what I heard from a farmer was so fundamental, so simple, and rang so true to me. He said, I just want to make a profit. That is all I ask, and it is so hard. So many of them now underwater in debt, and now literally we just saw underwater literally in their fields after the Missouri River broke through these levees, and they're just trying to make a profit feeding not just this country but the world. I think 30% of what is grown here is destined for markets around the world. Until those markets started shutting down under this administration, we levy tariffs. Tariffs are levied on us reciprocally, and it means that we're storing this stuff instead of getting it out. Stuff that is stored and spoiled now after these floods. By the way, Cindy Axne, your member of Congress, is fighting tooth and nail to make sure she gets money here also for stored grain to help those farmers out. She is a hero. But let's work with Cindy to rewrite the Farm Bill to reflect the answers to the questions that you just asked. In addition to cover crops, you know that there is a conservation allotment in the Farm Bill that has dwindled in every iteration of the Farm Bill. They've raided it like a piggy bank to pay for other programs, and that lack of investment means that farmers, in order to make that profit, have to cultivate every single square inch of the land that they own. And they share with me, listen, not only do I need to be able to make a profit in order to operate, I want to be able to pass this farm on to my daughters or to my sons and not have it subdivided into new housing development or become part of some mega corporate farm. In order to do that, I need to make money. So having the Farm Bill pay farmers to keep land in conservation, uncultivated, to plant cover crops, as you just suggested, to have better water management practices, because you're right, that dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is connected to what we put into our water systems here in Iowa or other Midwestern states. So we all have a connection to one another and a responsibility to one another. And I have yet to meet a farmer who wants to in any way pollute anybody else's water. They want to have the chance to do the right thing. We got to make sure that the technologies, the tools, the practices, and the processes are open to them. And then last thing, one of the other challenges that I've heard from Iowa farmers is they want to have more control over the distribution of what they grow. Right now, there's really just an extraordinary financial incentive to plant and grow corn and soybeans. If they could get more of what they grow to local consumers in Iowa and control some of that distribution, there'd be greater variety in what they raise. So they really are just responding to the market, really are just trying to make a profit, really are just trying to be good stewards of the land. Let's give them, through the Farm Bill, more opportunities to do more good for all of us. Thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it.
My name is Claudia Balta. I'm a physician assistant here in Red Oak. I work in a local family practice office. And my question, I kind of have twofold question, I guess. Number one, do you support Medicare for all type universal health care? Number two, we have a system that's very much established. It's not working, but established. What are some of the steps you see that we could actually take to move away from our insurance-based system that are actually going to work?
Yeah. Great questions. So I want to make sure that I give you super clear answers to very clear questions. The first one you asked is, do I support Medicare for all? There's an alternative to that I support called Medicare for America. And what it does is it ensures that everyone who today is uninsured completely enrolls in Medicare. Everyone who has insurance that is insufficient, meaning they don't have the money to pay the co-pays, the premiums are too high, the deductible is unbridgeable, they can choose to move over to Medicare as well. But as you just suggested in your question, there are tens of millions of our fellow Americans who have employer-sponsored insurance. I met with members of unions like the culinary workers in Nevada who really like the plans that they have because they work for them and their families. They can choose under our plan to keep those, and over time, if they so choose, move over to Medicare as well. But that is the quickest and surest way to get to universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care for all. Your second question is, what are some of the concrete steps we can take in the interim right now to improve it? Well, in Iowa, we could go from privatizing Medicaid to making sure that it's publicly run again so that we get real reimbursement levels for our PAs, for our doctors, for our nurses, for our providers. I'm really hearing rural communities especially struggling under this privatization, having a hard time making ends meet. And we saw in Texas a number of rural hospitals and clinics shut down over the last 5 years. It makes it really hard to make ends meet in those towns. We cannot have that happen in Iowa. We need to include a public option on the exchanges immediately for underserved communities that only have one insurance provider competing for their business. They are jacking those rates through the roof, making premiums unaffordable. If we introduce Medicare on those exchanges, it creates real competition and drives the cost of insurance down. And then I think we've got to make the case, not just to our fellow Democrats, but to Republicans and independents as well, that this is a far more cost-effective way to pay for one another's care than in the county jail, in the emergency room, or lives cut short or diminished because they're not well enough to be lived to their full potential. Those are the steps that I want to make sure that we take. Thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Okay, right here.
My name is Hunter Smith. I'm from central Nebraska, rural, super red area. But I go to Nebraska Wesleyan in Lincoln. I came here with my college friends, Sam and Connor. And we were talking about college and how it's really not accessible for everyone who seeks it. So I was wanting to see and ask you, how do you envision, a future in America where college can be accessible for anyone who seeks a higher education?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. And thank you for making the trip to come out. So, to give us context about the scope of the problem, $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt that is really crushing. We have, Cynthia, we can go down just a little bit. We've got 10% default on that, so clear that people are unable to make ends meet. We're asking people who are, we're asking people who want the education to be able to teach school, who want to be able to care for veterans at the VA, to take on debt for the privilege of being able to do it. It's ridiculous. So for those who carry some of that debt right now, I really want to expand the public service debt forgiveness program. There are 45,000 funded but unfilled positions within the VA. If you're willing to work on one of those, you want to clear your debt absolutely free, so you don't have to focus on that. You can focus just on those veterans that you're caring for. If you're willing to teach school or serve as a counselor, librarian, school bus driver, cafeteria worker, in an in-demand profession that is underserved, maybe especially in our communities, to bolster our public schools, that debt for you as well. For those who cannot do or choose not to do public service, let's refinance outstanding student loan debt at much lower interest rates. It's certainly better than having those who are carrying it default on it. So at least we're going to be able to get something back on our investment. And then lastly, to your question, for those who are graduating from high school, I want to make sure that they can go to community college absolutely free, earn that associate's degree, those trades, those skills, enter those professions that will allow them to command a living wage, live with purpose and dignity and function in their lives. And then 4-year publicly financed, public serving higher education institutions should allow their students to attend debt-free. It's an investment, it's not inexpensive, but it's an investment that will produce a return over the lifetime of those students many more times than the initial cost that we put in. So those are some steps we can take for those carrying the debt today and to ensure that others do not enter with debt going forward. Thank you for the question, and thanks for making the trip. Yes, Ms. Connie.
I'm Lyle Hottie. I got to speak to you on the phone from Hamburg.
Yes.
Thank you.
Alice, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking time to visit with us about the flooding and all that issue. But my real issue that I want to talk about is the ethanol fuel industry and how it's a mature industry now, we think, and there are people in Austin, Texas that have developed a solid state battery that's going to be the future, but we all know that takes 10 years to tool up for those kind of things to really have electric vehicles be economically feasible. So I think ethanol fuels does have a place, in our whole economy, especially the rural development. So I'm wondering what your position is on blender pumps, E85, automobile manufacturers producing more flex fuel vehicles. They're backing off on producing flex fuel vehicles for some reason. We don't know why. That really concerns me. And I just think there's a great potential still with ethanol fuels, and I would like to go full bore with that if we can. What are your feelings on that?
Thank you for the question. Thanks for spending some time with me on the phone so I could better understand the consequence of flooding to farmers. We announced a very ambitious goal on Monday of ensuring that this country is net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and that we're halfway there by 2030. It is going to have to be not just a whole of government approach, but a whole of America approach to get there. There are many things we can do as president in our administration day one. We can stop leasing for oil and gas on our public lands and our public waterways. We can ensure that all of our procurement decisions reflect the true cost of pollution and adding more carbon to the atmosphere, and that is priced in as well. We can sign back up to Paris. We can implement the Kigali Agreement, which seeks to bring HFC levels down so that we stop warming the planet. But we also call for a $5 trillion investment over the next 10 years, including an investment in infrastructure to make sure that the folks at Pacific Junction are safe going forward, but an investment in innovation and technologies as well. Some country is going to come up with that solid state battery. Some country is going to develop the new technologies upon which the rest of the world will run. I'd much rather it be the United States of America than it be China. If you look at the DARPA program and the internet and GPS, these amazing technologies that came out of it that we, the United States of America, brought to market and have benefited from disproportionately, we have the same chance to do that with climate as well. And yes, being able to use biofuels as part of our effort to wean ourselves completely off of fossil fuels has to be fundamental to it. And it helps to answer the question asked earlier about farmers. What I've heard from farmers in Iowa is that ethanol finally freed them from the dependence on commodity markets over which they had no control, that were half a world away, that are going to be decided at the whims of this president or somebody else in some other country, and allowed them to build value right here at home. We were in West Burlington, Iowa, not too long ago at an ethanol facility there, and what really impressed me was that the people I were meeting were younger than I was. They were able to attract or retain the next generation to stay in those smaller towns and on those farms because there were real job opportunities and long-term investment prospects. They're not from big corporations, but from cooperatives, from farmers, from families. That's so exciting to me. So yes, let's increase the standards. Yes, let's use the administration's EPA rulemaking authority to insist that we have cleaner emissions from our vehicles, which will necessitate a higher blend of ethanol going into them. I think all that makes sense, not just for Iowa, not just for this country, but for the planet and the generations that follow us. So thank you for asking the question.
Election, especially, is the voter suppression. And, it's like my ancestor was actually fought in the Revolutionary War, and they fought for that right to vote. It's like all the gerrymandering and, with the reservation up in North Dakota, where they didn't have an actual street address, it's up now proud that they were doing this. What can you do to help change that? Because if you're American, you have the right to vote. It's not a privilege. It is a right.
Well said. Thank you. Couldn't agree with you more. And perhaps my home state of Texas is one of the best/worst examples of what we're talking about. We until November of 2018 ranked 50th in the country in voter turnout. Now we're a big, proud state of big, proud people who love this country, love our democracy. So that's not the reason or the problem. It's that we have literally drawn people based on race and ethnicity alone. And it's not just me saying it, the courts found this to be the case, out of congressional districts, diminishing the power of their vote and any chance that we're going to hear their voice. We have racist voter ID laws that say that you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you cannot use your student ID at the community college or the four-year university or the historically black college and university. And there's one case in point that I'd like to make. There's a county called Waller County in Texas. It is 75% white. Within it is a city called Prairie View, which is home to Prairie View A&M, which is one of these extraordinary HBCUs, and the student body there is 80% black. During early voting, first week, there was no early voting location on that campus. The second week of early voting, it was not easy to get to that location. To add insult to injury or further exacerbate the problem in Waller County, there was confusion about where those students were registered to vote, but they did not allow that to deter them. And those students, including Brittany BC, marched 6 miles, 1,000 of them, to go vote. Some of them waited 5 hours to cast their ballot. And when I talk about a 500% increase in voter turnout in 2018, it was those students helping to overcome the racist barriers and active voter suppression that we have. So they're part of the answer, but we have to institutionalize their courage. The way we do that is through a new Voting Rights Act that guarantees that every single vote in this country counts. We should have same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, so when those students turn 18, they're registered to vote, they're ready to go. And you mentioned gerrymandering. Right now, if we're honest with ourselves, members of Congress choose their voters, not the other way around. So having citizen-led, no politicians like me allowed in the room, redistricting commissions, that's the way to get this done going forward. Thank you for bringing this up. Appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Joe Nealon. Excuse me. And I'm a Korean War veteran. And I also served some time in early Vietnam. I was in the Navy, USS Cook. And I hear President Trump talking about his patriotism. And I fret over that great deal, where he had 5 deferments. I understood the first 4 were dealing with education, and which is fairly popular. But that 5th one involved various people and expenditures of money. And I really kind of ponder why Democratic candidates don't get on this and bring it up and bring it up. I mean, Trump is great for being personal, but and Biden has been showing that get personal right back at him, and it's popular. It works, and I believe it does. I would love to see you or any other Democratic candidate get right on this draft deferment Trump, where money was clearly involved in that 5th deferment, and we would, as veterans, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First and foremost, for your service and the example that you set for the rest of us and this country. And really, I've got to tell you, you're saying that with the basis in serving in Korea, serving in Vietnam, willing to sacrifice, lose your life for this country, is so much more powerful than if I were to say it or any Democratic contender, because that might look political. This is personal and is reflected in your own service and sacrifice. I'll tell you this. I do think we need to draw the contrast between us. And we can talk about it in terms of policy. I refer to these trade wars that are just hammering farmers here in Iowa. A foreign policy, when we're at war in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Somalia and Yemen and Libya tonight, under a commander-in-chief who does not believe in our alliances, has tried to turn his back on NATO, has cozied up to dictators like Kim Jong-un of North Korea, who he says he is falling in love with. That's what the President of the United States said. Kim Jong-un, who has the blood of Otto Warmbier on his hands, who threatens this country and our allies with nuclear attack. A president who embraces Vladimir Putin, a murderous dictator in Russia who attacked our democracy. And instead of doing that, we have an opportunity to talk about renewing those alliances that were forged in sacrifice and service, reflecting on our opportunities here in our own hemisphere with the United States, Mexico, Canada, and the other countries of the Americas coming together to meet challenges like these kids who are traveling 2,000 miles to come to our border, not with walls or cages or inhumanity or U.S. service members on the border, but with diplomacy and investment and involvement with the rest of the world. And then I hope on the campaign trail, our campaign that seeks to bring everybody in and exclude no one, that will never ask who you voted for in 2016, just ask what you're looking forward to doing in 2021. I hope that this is the antidote and the answer to what you just described right now, because the challenges before us are the biggest of our lifetimes. And I worry that if I were to descend into the name calling and the pettiness and the personal attacks, we would lose sight of the goals, the aspirations, and the ambitions that we have in common. And that's what drove me to get into this race. And that's what I'm going to try to bring this country around together to be able to do. So thank you for your comments. And again, thank you for your service. Appreciate that.
Right behind you. And I'm sorry, I wish we could get to everybody, but this is going to be our last question.
Hi, I'm Tricia Early. I'm from Red Oak. And not to add to your list of concerns, I spent 10 years in the educational system. My family, my friends all work in the educational system. And with your talk of equality, it seems to me that our educational system has been under attack and it's culminated into lack of unions now and then charter schools. So my question really to you is, what is your stance on public funding being siphoned out of our public schools, which allow equality of education for everyone into the charter school system, and we won't even mention it.
Thank you for the comment, and thank you for your commitment to public service. At a really tough time, right? As you mentioned, under attack. We were in Council Bluffs yesterday, and a high school teacher asked me what I was going to do about the teacher shortage. As we fail to pay public school educators, commensurate with their value, with the student loans that they've got on their backs that they have to pay out, they're dropping out of the profession. In one state that we were just in, South Carolina, in the first year, 1/4 of public school teachers leave the profession. By year 5, half of them have. After everything that they've invested in themselves, in us, after everything we've invested in them, we lose out on all of that. So paying teachers more, making sure that they can answer their calling and not have to respond to high pressure, high stakes, standardized tests that in no way effectively measure that teacher's performance in the classroom or that child's capacity to learn. That's all got to be part of the answer. I do think there is a role for public, nonprofit charters that have governance structure, are accountable and responsible to taxpayers, to be laboratories of innovation as teachers' unions first envisioned them in the first place, who can distribute what they are able to bring out of these laboratories with the public school system at large. But there is no way to charter our way out of public education challenges. Our 3 kids, Ulysses, Molly, and Henry, 12, 10, and 8, are all going to public schools in El Paso, Texas, receiving a world-class dual language education, a dual language curriculum developed by public school educators who are helping us to make the most of our binational community, where we live and where we are. But on this last point that you made, this is something that can bring us together, not just as Democrats, but Democrats and Republicans and really just Americans. We were in one of those very red counties in Texas, in a community called Henrietta. And I was talking to a Republican family, first about health care, and then as I was talking about how we needed to replace the Affordable Care Act with something that ensured that everybody truly got care and that it was affordable, the mother of the family kind of elbowed me and she said, "I'm a public school teacher. And if you let Betsy DeVos take my public school tax dollars out of my classroom and send them to a private school in the form of a voucher," she said, "I will hunt you down. I will get you. I will make you pay for this." So I thought how interesting that you know, I a Democrat and she a Republican, living in 2 different parts of the state, have this common concern and common cause that can bring us together, not just to win an election, as important as that is, but to make sure that we replace the insufficient funding that we have right now with a real investment in public schools. So thank you for asking the question. Appreciate that. Thanks again for being here. Is that solo? Okay. Red Oak, thank you for having us out here today. Very, very grateful for doing this. Joey, Jan, Jackie from Adams County, thank you all for having us. We are very, very grateful. Thank you.
So we'll start right over here.
Hello. Hey, everybody don't run off too fast. We're having a free will.